This is the second lecture for Chapter 3. And starting off here, just looking at population distribution. So starting off, we're going to look at maple trees. Looks like sugar maples. And sometimes we don't think of it this way when you think of a population, but trees can be a population. And I always had it in my head that, growing up, that sugar maples were just everywhere. They're not. They're kind of a northeastern-ish type tree, so apparently you don't find them out west. And again, one of those climate change things is we're starting to see sugar maples migrate north because of the warming conditions in the south. Notice it kind of butted up against the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains on the southeastern side portion of that. But yeah, they are moving further north into Canada and away from the south because of the warming, drier conditions. How does energy cycle in food? Well, probably have some pretty good pictures that'll show it here. You have different levels. You have producers and consumers. And sometimes these terms are a little bit confusing. So you have a primary producer. And the only things that produce are things that photosynthesize. A couple little bacteria guys, eugleninas if I'm not mistaken. But producers are typically going to be photosynthesizers, plants. And then you have primary consumers, plant eaters. That's a primary consumer. And then you have secondary and tertiary consumers going through the food web or food chain. And then ultimately you have decomposers, things like bacteria and fungi that will break organisms down into more simple components, macro molecules and such, and return nutrients back to the beginning to be uptaken by primary producers. And these are those guys down there, the decomposers and detrivores. Detrivores are typically thought of as bugs, and decomposers are usually thought of as being like bacteria and fungi. Energy. Aerobic respiration. Whoops, go on back to that. And that's things that need oxygen to go through that process. And then you have anaerobic, which is going to be without. So if you have incomplete oxygen available, typically you're going to have anaerobic respiration. And we do this as well, which is why sometimes you get those cramps and such, the acetic acid, the lactic acid, whatever it is, building up in the muscles. If you hear my dog barking in the background, sorry. Looking at, again, this cycle of energy going through a system, we suffer because of the second law of thermodynamics, that every time you have an exchange going back and forth, someone eats somebody else, or producing energy, whatever you like, there's going to be a loss of heat, thermal energy in each step, every single time. Now, it is all accounted for. First law of thermodynamics, everything is accounted for. But it doesn't transfer 100% from one to the other. Okay, biodiversity. Why? Stability. Nature likes stability. It doesn't like to be disturbed. And when you, just one little fun fact, it's not specifically here, but I'll mention it. Biodiversity is going to be its highest towards the equator, where it's warmest and wettest. And as you move north in Canada, you're going to have less biodiversity. It's colder, not necessarily drier, but it's colder, and it doesn't allow for as many species as you have in like a tropical rainforest. So these are all things that kind of go along with biodiversity. I won't get too far into much of this. I already talked about it a little bit. All right, looking at trophic levels is another way of talking about food webs or food chains. As far as trophic levels, it's about the food that is available there. So your first trophic level is going to be your producers, the things that photosynthesize. And then going up to your second, this is a little bit confusing. The second trophic level are primary, that's the confusing part, consumers. And then, so you just have to kind of keep track of it because the numbers start to get off a little bit. Third trophic is the secondary, fourth trophic is the tertiary. So you just have to read the whole thing and get an understanding for what each one is. Not too bad. You just got to pay attention a little bit. Same idea here. I just happen to include a second food web and just kind of showing how these are put together. Now notice one thing I'll put in here. This is sort of like a pyramid. You don't see it in here, but the base of the pyramid is the first trophic level, where these are producers, primary producers, phytoplankton. They produce their own energy. And then it kind of moves up each trophic level as far as consumers, primary, secondary, tertiary, as you're going up. This kind of is like a pyramid, so it's designed in such a way that it shows that. Also notice the way the arrows are given. The arrow shows the direction of food energy moving towards. So, for example, that leopard seal is eating all the ones that have arrows going towards it, not the other way around. Hippo, this is just something that describes ways in which species or an ecosystem can be harmed or degrade, and they just spell it out as far as being hippo, and you can kind of go through that list. And these are all negative components that hurt an ecosystem or particular species. Resistance and resilience. These are often confused easily. And they're measured in regards to being high and low. So let's just talk about the words individually, and then we can talk about the high and low. Resistance is the measure of how well or how much disturbances a system can take without changing. So something that has high resistance means you can put negative consequences towards it. Think drought. And it takes it very well. It doesn't die off. Think of like a pasture or a garden, something you can visualize. It takes it very well. So high drought, it does fine. Now, some things have low resistance. Drought, it just dies out. You got to go buy some more because it's dead. Resilience is how quickly it comes back after some disturbance. So, example, we'll go with the garden again. Something that's high resilience is you have a drought or a fire or something that comes through, and it looks like it's dead. Dog's barking. But next season, it all comes back. It has really high resilience. Or, you can look at it from the other way, is you have a drought, it dies, and it never comes back. Or you have a forest, and you cut it down, and it never comes back. So things have different resistance to change and resilience, the ability to come back after a disturbance comes through. 10% rule. This goes to the food chain or pyramid, and we already talked about the different levels. Generally speaking, this isn't exact, but generally speaking, each time you bump up a level of the food chain, going from primary producers to primary consumers, you're only able to keep about 10% of the energy that comes through. It's not very efficient. The other 90% is lost pretty much through just biological activities, heat, respiration. All of those things are a energy loss. So you only actually are able to keep about 10% of the energy that comes in. And we'll add some definitions, I think, to that eventually in here. This is the gross primary productivity. You can look at different parts of the country. You notice that in the middle of the country, it's very low because you have deserts and mountains. They're just not really productive areas. And then you go into the southeast areas of the country and kind of just the east in general. They're much more habitable. There's more primary productivity going on there. As far as different biomes go, or ecosystems, some do better than others. So this is a little bit of trivia that might come in handy in a test at some point. as far as terrestrial ecosystems, what are the most productive? Those are going to be swamps and marshes. There's some land in there. It doesn't sound like it's land, but there's some land in there. And then tropical rainforests. Those two are neck and neck. Not much difference. You don't have to rank one more than the other. They're about the same. The other one, going into aquatic, is going to be estuaries. And an estuary is a location where you have a river, a freshwater river, think the Mississippi, dumping into a saltwater body of water. So again, New Orleans. The estuary down there, where you have these mixings of water, you have a lot of biological gross net primary productivity going on down there. So I just mentioned that term, net primary productivity. That is a mathematical difference between the gross primary productivity that something has minus the respiration for the life functions that are going on in that organism. That gives you the amount that it is able to keep. So it's kind of like that 10%. That's the 10% left over after it takes in the energy and goes through the respiration. And we'll do an activity on that in class. All right. I was a little long-winded on that one, so about 11 minutes in, so that's a pretty good place to take a break.